going?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm so ready for today's forum.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Why is that turning off and on? Hope it doesn't do that. Hey Jay, can you hear us?
Yes, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jay. I'm glad we can hear you and you can hear us. Now, Johanna, do you have a PowerPoint or anything to share? Analog. Like, no digital.
No digital,
Awesome. Okay.
except we will have people participating from Zoom.
Yeah.
But
So-
I decided not to make a presentation,
Oh, good.
PowerPoint presentation.
All good.
I have physical handouts, which I hope isn't a detriment to people
I mean,
online.
if it's resources that we can like put in the
Yeah.
chat, like a link.
Yeah, which, hey Jay,
Yeah,
the stuff that I printed out to hand out are things that,
How are you?
I'm good.
should be able to be located in that like working
Have a
document.
seat. There's
have any
coffee
idea?
if you need it at the coffee table.
This is the creation care meeting, I assume.
Yes, it is.
Hi, Marianne.
Well, hi.
Nice to see you this morning.
okay. Do you want me to try to find that document then?
Oh, yeah, I did not clarify. Yes, if you could find it and then, I didn't think this part through that well. You know, these are things that we can share afterwards. I don't think it's super important to figure out how to share it in the chat, but they exist. So that's-
Throw it out and hope somebody gets it. Morning, hi, Marion. How you doing? Not bad. How about you? Pushing through. Yeah. All we can do. Yeah. Honestly. I did something in a, I don't know, fall or whatever. So I didn't fall, but I just sort of backed
Coffee's
myself.
ready.
into it. I was wondering,
Good boy. in about 10
honest to God, the pain. You know, I mean, all you can do is gonna take time off. But man, it's hard to do.
Yeah, Johanna, would that have been in an email that you sent or?
Yeah, that would have been in the follow-up email from Monday. I shared the information.
I'm just feeling very much weirded out. And I think that here.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yay. So what I'm sharing
I don't know if you did it, but. Aaron's been
in
trying to
person are
present
kind of
it,
like the,
but I don't understand.
I made a cut of the invitation to action.
You should-
And then if you'd want, there's like helpful links at the bottom.
All creation. Okay, well, I'll trust you on that one.
So that
Okay.
at the bottom, what could be helpful is the
Yeah, I just.
LSEIRG, what is a land acknowledgement?
To do anything but print, because.
That could be helpful to share.
Okay, is that the land acknowledgements? Or wait, is that,
No, I was gonna thank you again for that.
do I have to launch the links to find that document or?
It just got away from me.
If they're embedded into the document.
Well, we got one more month. You do, okay, well, I'll remember that. That's a good idea to get a safety thing for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been fun. Shirley took a group on Friday. I've taken three
Yeah.
or 4 groups.
Oh, that's nice.
And Johanna, is Barbara Lindicki gonna be there to talk about how
Hi,
we,
Jay.
how we solicit feedback?
Good morning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
She's here.
Thank you.
Okay. I think it would be good if Barbara could do that right in person there. Just that we want.
I'm here,
Okay,
Jay.
Cool.
I thought so too.
okay, good.
Good morning.
Where I get myself in trouble more often than not is.
Then I think just that one link, honestly, should be able to be helpful for people to chat.
And you're constantly sort of having to evaluate.
Thank you, Jen.
That evaluative thing you have to do as a teacher. I think that is welcome. Hello. Hello. Hi. Hi.
I start the day by breaking my glasses. This is gonna be a really good day after tomorrow.
How did you write them? The ones that are on your head or some other?
Those are my other ones. I had set them on the bed and I had put some blankets over or whatever, and I managed to just sit on them.
Oh,
So I didn't realize
that'll
they
do
were-
it, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I gotta get.
Well, that's a good excuse to go get new ones. I don't know. I'm always looking for an excuse
Me
from
too,
you.
yeah. I know.
It's kind of like an accessory that you wear every day,
I know.
so it's kind of like,
I printed.
even though I bulk at the class, I kind of go,
Of
but
the-
you wear it every
Every day.
single day.
Okay.
I figured
Right.
those two things would be helpful to pass around in person, this is what, you know, with the line. And then, I was just gonna go over the summary, and then if you wanted to talk about what we wanted, or why we wanted to bring it to it.
Yeah, yeah, it's that was the kind of thing, like I just said,
Allergies, not COVID.
like those first two.
It's
I
not
got
crazy,
kind of
like every time
looking
you
at
cough or sneeze, you have to
first
say,
stuff.
oh, but. I can't get
Yeah.
that COVID.
Back to the stuff and then
Yeah.
stuff.
Cause I don't drive.
There.
You know,
Every morning for 20 years.
No.
It's.
Yeah.
It's filled up in my throat, that gets on my larynx.
And that, does that require talk? I mean, how do you feel that other than talk? Oh, what about if you just talk? That's
In the morning, I'll get interrupted by, which is why I like, I'm pretty regular at morning. I told them I couldn't possibly read it. It really is. I just myself, but you know, it's also because I have.
That would be, because it was not us.
So the woman.
Wow.
After, there's another. But she just bought. tons of plants.
Okay,
But-
all
I could
right.
go over
My
like
doctor and I.
Yes, yeah.
Basically.
I also brought the books, but I don't know if you wanted to pass them down.
You know, I
If
mean,
it's an allergy, are they?
and I was, I
don't figure out what it is.
I haven't, that's probably does. No, that's an uphill battle. I saw her, I was sitting with him in her lap, and I just. You know, I hated to put things in there. I know.
Hey, Johanna, I'm having trouble trying to figure out how to paste it in the chat. I will, I'll keep trying, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna get it in there.
Okay, no worries.
And,
uh,
I know.
Not detrimental.
I took my.
Jay, do you need me to take over the host duties here in the room?
Yes, that would be good.
Great, glad to.
I mean, I just.
You
know, it's a 20-year-old car.
Yeah.
Sunday.
Give it the one by the- Yeah.
The rest of the day, I said, I would just kind of. I would hate to rest of what is that. So that's kind of the same with them. Yeah, and.
We can share.
Well, you're very structured. Accommodating.
Yeah, it's been just.
How did the-
It was good.
And I run, you know, it's not the spontaneous preaching and and I got the first one, which I'm not sure why, but I did. So,
But when you
And
did
he
have
found
one
it.
that requires.
so we never said a word to me about the sermon.
Oh,
We got
yeah.
along with it or whatever. 4 years later, I get this call from this kid, said, oh, my dad really wanted me to preach at the school. And I was like,
Poor guy, he had a bike crash.
oh, God.
Yeah,
And I said, oh, it wasn't bad. So I feel really bad.
I didn't say it. All got his jaw wired shut.
All of them said, yeah, he's from Seattle. He and Bill just. Singing. I'm kind of. big
Went over
fan of
Pam's
his.
bars and face. Oh, my big one was John Ritter.
Oh, yeah, everybody, I did too. He was really.
Went to the hospital, had x-rays.
Was that stuff was was that stuff we're supposed to take?
He lives downtown and he's coming here.
Well, that's, I was just gonna have you grab one. if we are.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning as we launch a new series in our Faith Forum programming, Justice and Vitality in Caring for God's Creation. Welcome to those who are with us on Zoom. Welcome, Beth. and Jay and Dan. Please look after each other there in the Zoom chat so that we all feel connected. And please leave comments in the chat or unmute and offer your contributions to the conversation at the appropriate moments. Before we begin, I'd like to say thank you to the Creation Care team who are leading this first conversation, led by Johanna Frisbee. Thank you so much for blessing us with what you are teaching us this morning and leading our conversation. And I thought I would open with a prayer from the Book of Common Prayer. It's collect number 40, for knowledge of God's creation. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, you made the universe with all its marvelous order, its atoms, worlds, and galaxies, and the infinite complexity of living creatures. Grant that as we probe the mysteries of your creation, we may come to know you more truly and more surely fulfill our role in your eternal purpose. In the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Some etiquette conversations that we need to all consent to is, if you are comfortable, you may remove your mask in the room. However, if you'd like to keep your mask on, it is mask optional in these gatherings at the church.
All right, I'll talk to you.
Those who are with us on Zoom, we
Okay,
ask that you please mute
bye-bye.
when you are online so that we don't hear private conversations in your household. So please mute if you are online. Please unmute, however, when you're invited to share or comment or offer a question. Otherwise, if you are not able to unmute, then please put it into the chat. Any questions before I give the floor to Johanna and the Creation Care team? Very good. Johanna. Oh, sorry.
Only I see some people with paper, and I was just wondering if there was a handout that I just couldn't locate. Is there-
I don't think we
Okay,
handed out
All right,
any.
found them over here. We weren't sure if they were.
I passed out this thing called a decolonial primer.
Oh, sorry.
Really good.
It is. That's one of my professors, Nestor Medina at the University of Toronto. You're welcome to take those. That came from last month's series.
Okay.
If you had any questions about what decoloniality is, remember September was Decolonial Stewardship of God's Resources. Please take that resource. It's a wonderful paper from my dear Professor Nestor Medina.
And there weren't enough to go around, just so you know.
If you need a copy, email me. But today we are turning our attention to justice and vitality in caring for God's creation. So Johanna, the floor is yours.
That's actually a really good introduction, because this is also kind of about well, not kind of, very much about decolonizing, but I want to preface that there'll be multiple of us from the Creation Care team sharing, and we'll just go around in a circle when our time to share starts. And I'll just start with an introduction, and I do have handouts, so we have things for you too. But today's topic is, why do Christians need to acknowledge Indigenous peoples' land? And we are kind of forming our discussion today around the transformational journey towards land acknowledgement that the United Methodist Church offered earlier at the beginning of this year, and that's the first handout. I wanted to share the first 2 pages for folks to be able to have a visual to look at, because we'll mostly be talking about this in our guide for land acknowledgement.
Should I need a few more copies?
I have 10, and I think they're exactly 10. You don't get a copy though.
That's okay.
Oh, I'm all sorts of nervous, so forgive me for being a little strange.
Okay, if you want to keep talking, I'd have
Oh,
those out.
there.
Now that you're almost done.
Okay,
Sorry, I should
Oh,
have
that's okay.
offered earlier.
I could have asked. Okay, so, this came from the Creation Care Ministry, since we are hosting this today. It came from our discussion of the importance of developing a land acknowledgement and how it is integral to our relationship with the land. You might ask why the Creation Care team is leading this discussion. But the land acknowledgement is integral to environmental justice, and Creation Care kind of follows that environmental justice lens, and we use the three-legged stool from Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. So we take action in the practical, systemic, and the relational. And this falls under systemic and has kind of become its own thing too, as it ties all three together. We created a small group within the Creation Care team. It was Michael May, Dan Vogel, and Linda Lindeke, and myself, and Mary Ann joined a few of those meetings. And then we brought it to the larger Creation Care team, and now we're bringing it to our larger community. And because we realize that it cannot just be an insular project. If we want to create a land acknowledgement for our community, it can't come from 2 or 3 people. It needs to come from all of us in order for it to mean something to our community. And so to create a real and meaningful land acknowledgement for St. John's, we need to learn, reflect, challenge, and journey together for the purpose of writing a non-performative personal land acknowledgement statement. So what is a land acknowledgement? From the Lawyer Students Public Interest Research Group that is referenced in that land acknowledgement journey, a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. Why do we recognize the land? To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land, and to seek to understand your place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. It is also worth noting that acknowledging land is Indigenous protocol. So we learned a lot in this 6-part series, and there's much more that we can learn from the land acknowledgement journey, and I want to acknowledge that I really only know a surface level too, and so I'm excited to go on this journey deeper with the community. And the 6 steps that guided the program were: 1, our identity, which allowed us to look at the connection between land acknowledgement statements and our identities as Christians who care for the earth, and also where we and our personal selves come from. 2, our history. So we watched the doctrine of discovery, what has happened historically that makes a land acknowledgement statement necessary. 3 was theological work. What are the theological groundings that inform the writing of a land acknowledgement statement? Number 4 was decolonization is not a metaphor. How can a land acknowledgement statement impact our path as disciples of Jesus Christ who are committed to the transformation of the world? 5, the actual writing of a land acknowledgement statement. So who can we become as we take the work of a land acknowledgement statement seriously and transformatively? And number 6, next steps. What next steps are important after a land acknowledgement statement is written? So important to note about a land acknowledgement statement is that it's a commitment to action and to ongoing learning and to ongoing discovery and building. And so I'm going to pass it on to Michael to answer the question, what did we learn and why are we now bringing this to faith formation?
Yeah, so the first couple of sessions that you talked about there, they really started with the idea of identity and who we are and how our identities are shaped by many things, but part of that is who came before us, who our ancestors are, what our history is, like where did our people come from before they came to this land, like what lands did they come from, why did they leave those lands, why did they come to this land, and who was living on this land before our people came. And that's what we're talking about, colonization and decolonization. That's what we're talking about, that most of us weren't, like our original ancestors came from somewhere else to come to live here. those of us who come from European backgrounds, there's this whole thing that we talked about in the class about the doctrine of discovery. It was basically like an agreement that European nations have with each other when they went to non-European lands. That whoever got there first, whoever quote unquote discovered it, got dibs on it. And then the other European nations kind of had to be hands off about it. And so they would just go and just kind of divide up territories, these lands that they had, again, quote unquote, discovered, without really any consideration about like who was already living there. So if it wasn't European, it didn't count. And so it was very harmful. And so a lot of the kind of early work we did in the class was kind of like learning about this and acknowledging this. And the question is, okay, why as Christians do we care about any of this? And it really goes back to the creation story and about the relationships that God set up between himself and his creation, and his people, as human beings, as part of that creation. And when he blessed Adam and Eve in chapter 1 of Genesis, he talks about go into the land and subdue it and rule over it. And we really, I think as humanity, we've kind of misunderstood that relationship. And we take very literally those ideas of subduing and ruling, where it's not a relationship anymore. It's just we can kind of do with this whatever we want to. We can kind of rule over it and subdue it with our own kind of selfish needs and wants and desires, rather than do it in relationship with God and have a relationship with the land the way that he does. One of my favorite New Testament passages is when Paul writes to the Roman church, and he writes, "For creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, and hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God." And what this is saying is that creation itself is waiting for God's people to return to the kinds of relationships that God set up for us to have in the first place. And colonization is all about separating out those relationships and disconnecting those relationships. It's about disconnecting people from people. It's about disconnecting like different parts of our life. So we kind of like categorize this is spiritual and this is secular, and when those two things don't have anything to do with each other, whereas really everything has to do with the spiritual. Everything is sacred. So it disconnects people from people. It disconnects us from ourselves. It disconnects people from nature. And what creation care is all about is reconnecting all of those things and seeing all of these things as intertwined, and building those relationships back up. So that just the idea of land acknowledgement is just acknowledging the land, acknowledging the fact that we are connected to it, and not just us, but many other people are connected to it. That's what we care.
Yeah, thank you. I want to pass it to Dan, who's on Zoom, to provide the sample piece that you created, and what the purpose of the land acknowledgement can be in our community.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so if you remember, the process of creating St. John's Collect, which we pray every Sunday, took 4 years. Creation Care is looking for a similar process for our land acknowledgement, not the length of time, but the inclusion of everyone. There are many examples of land acknowledgements. If you look at the deed for St. John's, you will see a physical description of the property, so many feet off the survey lines, done over hundreds of years, following with the names of the previous owners. I've heard lots of land acknowledgements that sound like a codicil, adding the names of the indigenous people to those kind of deeds. That deed is not what St. John means to us, though. St. John's is the baptismal font where we add new members. It's the undercroft where the young learn to be in community. It's the altar where they come to pledge their undying love to each other in marriage. That same altar is where we come every week to join with Christ in the celebration of the Eucharist. It is the center aisle where we offer blessings to those who are leaving for other places. It's where we leave after Mass for the week ahead. It's where we pray over the casket of those leaving for the final time. A land acknowledgement is first and foremost an acknowledgement of the land. A pause at the beginning of a meeting to praise all of creation. Those who've read Braiding Sweetgrass remember the powerful words that the Haudenosaunee people speak at the beginnings of their meetings, their Thanksgiving prayer. We are Episcopalians, though, and in our tradition, we have morning prayer, where on Saturdays we pray Canticle 12, a song of creation. It has 5 parts: an invocation, a cosmic order, the earth and its creatures, the people of God, ending with a doxology. Who would dare to violate someone who would violate something as it prays to God? So we ask each of you to write your own acknowledgement. This is one that I'm working on, and I pray every Friday during morning prayer. We acknowledge the special relationships we have with all of creation. We echo those who came before us, especially the indigenous people who lived on the land we currently inhabit. We understand that this land was stolen from them and just compensation needs to be paid. We pray also to transform us to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things, recognizing all living things includes more than things with a pulse. So I invite you all to try to write your own land acknowledgement.
Wonderful. So I want to pass it along to Barbara to continue on why it's important for the congregation to participate and ask how people want to engage.
Okay. This piece of the discussion mostly came from Linda, who is out in the farmers market as we speak. So I'm reiterating her concerns, but that we've all probably heard land acknowledgements from various institutions and meetings and clubs and activities. And Linda pointed out that this needs to be personal. This needs to be from St. John's and our own experience and our own, if we're going to be saying we believe or we want to acknowledge this, then it should be we. So that's a key aspect to keep in mind. I was thinking as Michael was talking that our first priest, when we go down the hallway and see the pictures of the priests, was Kitson, or at least they were involved in the founding of St. John's, and Kitson was a fur trader and had relations with, or the Kitson family did, in Kitson County and all. So I mean that it should be, we should know our own history and know our personal situation and you know what St. John's history and what the Episcopal Church's history has been with the indigenous people of Minnesota, and have that in our minds as we come up with our land acknowledgement. And as Dan points out, it's the land too, and all of us, every morning prayer I go to, I pray for in thanks for the bounty and beauty of the earth, and that we need to remember that it's the land that allows us to live, and without it, and to take care of the soil and the land we live on. So those are the fact that this is a statement of our belief, not of some institution, or not handed down from something we read in a book, but what the people of St. John's can really commit to. And we talk about, like Dan talks about, our debt to the indigenous people that we stole the land from. And if we're talking about reparations or some action that we feel we should take, then that needs to be believed by the congregation as they say it. And that's gonna require discussion and thought and compromise and understanding. So Jay and I are going to try to get people's get the discussion going and get people's input. And we're looking to you all for your best advice as to method. Obviously, there could be an online comment section or whiteboard kind of program. We were thinking of, coffee hour flip chart with post-it note comment methods. But again, rather than us telling the congregation how best to get their input, we thought we'd ask you what good ideas, what works. Phone calls to people, I'm not sure I want to do that, but I'm sure I don't want to do that. But in any event, how do we get a discussion going? And we're asking for your input. There are some questions here that we would probably use as a basis. And I was looking, and I think there's 6, and that's probably about how many Sundays we have before we're looking to have this done. We're aiming for at least some report back in December. Whether we have a final statement or not by then, I'm not sure, but so for the discussion, if we get back to coffee hours inside, in the flip chart method or Blackboard method, but what else works, or what do you guys suggest?
It seems strange to me to try to solicit input without background education for the majority. So to me, you're sort of asking blindly for people to comment on something they don't really understand or know about.
You're right.
So it won't be a very effective collection of information.
Well, as Joanna mentioned, the College for St. John's took 4 years, so more congregational education or discussion at a different level.
Yeah, but if the goal is to simply reach a first draft to educate from, that might be doable, but to think that in that time frame you'd come up with something usable, I don't think it's realistic. Not an end product.
Yeah, I think our committee doesn't have a timetable in mind, but
So this is Dan Vogel, and in response, in the Thursday book club, we have been doing a lot of reading about racial equity and stuff, but we did read Braiding Sweetgrass. So we have been reading, and right now we're reading The Seed Keepers. So all of those are educational resources for the land acknowledgement. So there are resources that are available.
Craig or Barbara, do you have experience with the College of St. John's and the process that was used on that?
That was actually before I came, but I wanted to ask if, I feel like because of the times that we live in partly and the work that we've been doing previous to this, I feel like my head is a little bit reeling from where to put a priority or a focus or anything. And when I tried to understand badly the last 2-3 weeks about decolonialism, which I think this primer is gonna help a lot. Could we maybe, it seems like this would be, and I hate to say, an easy thing to simply craft a statement that acknowledges we sit on native land. I mean, and I know that some churches, I think the cathedral at the beginning, either in the bulletin or the presider says, you know, we acknowledge that we sit on Dakota land, that we are on Dakota land or whatever. And to me, that's a very very important, I would love to hear that reminder at the beginning of a church service or at the beginning of any meeting. On the other hand, what follows that then? And I'm probably getting ahead of this, but I'm just interested in what is the next step? What is the next step with the African-American issues that we've talked about? What are, because right now I'm just overwhelmed with, aren't we all, stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly like, thank you for bringing that up, because those are really good points, and there are really good articles too on critiques on land acknowledgements, which there are a lot of really empty land acknowledgements, and that's not what we want to eventually have, but even the simple statements that we are on Dakota land, like you said, are good reminders. I was reading an article that Linda sent on land acknowledgements are just moral exhibitionism, which they certainly can be, and we don't want that to be the case with our best intentions that we have. But one of the bullet points brought up asking what of the real issues facing Indigenous peoples: housing, unemployment, child removal, generational poverty, lack of adequate health care, police violence, racism, and erasure. In other words, real colonialism. And that certainly applies to not just Indigenous people, but like our neighbors in the Rondo neighborhood that was destroyed. And I think this fits in with what we've talked about with environmental racism, and why another reason why the Creation Care team has really like held on to this and brought it forward and seeing it as important, because it can be an easy reminder statement, and maybe that's what it can be in the beginning. But we do want it to move past that and to be a commitment to action and ongoing justice, which maybe then would fit in with all the other overwhelming things that are happening in the world. And
You know, we're sitting on, Jared's gonna kill me, but oh well, on a significant endowment in this church. And how that endowment came to be, I don't know. I think it was the generosity of a lot of people over the years, smart money management. But at what point do we take a look at how that money is invested? And if it is invested in green, I don't know what the term is, stock markets or whatever. And I know that's down the line, but you know, I think at some point we will have to look at, if we're serious about this, what that, it's kind of lurking in the background, and it's great to have it. It's such a gift because it keeps the building, you know, we use it for building stuff. But on the other hand, morally, what does that mean? I know when I worked with the stewardship department for a while, at the diocese, and I was a preacher for them, you know, the minds would say, went out to consult congregations, where if somebody gives you a big grant of money, the first thing you do is give it away. Because it doesn't reflect really what you're living off of. You know, it doesn't really reflect the real budget and the real expenses. But anyway, I just throw that out there. Maybe that'll be relevant at some point, maybe not.
yeah, I think a good reminder too, these conversations started well before the class, the journey at the beginning of the year. I think we started talking about this beginning of 2021. No.
Runs together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so it's already on its like second year of discussion. And I like to view that as a reminder. In the beginning, I was trying to rush the process of like, okay, we need to write something now, and the three of us can write it,
Yeah.
and we'll give it to the community and it'll be great. And then Linda was really adamant on like, this should not be rushed. And so I think that's a really good reminder in
And
the,
it shouldn't be top down. It should-
yeah,
It's the, you know, if it's a statement of the congregation, the congregation have ownership of it.
yeah. And so with the processes, like the big question, what do we do with our endowment, or what do we do with our land and our resources? Does not have to be answered right away, but I think it's so good to like reflect on that and what that means to us. Because it is also really uncomfortable to think about, but it's important.
And another
See,
thing.
Johanna?
Jay?
I just wanted to make two comments. First is, Beth shared a comment in the chat. You know, could a shared Google Doc be a way to distribute information in that? And I think that gets at, and what Roger brought up, really get at the challenge is that how do we craft something that people believe when they state it, and how do we do that on a congregation-wide level? Because it is something that requires education and background and reflection, and then to generate put together the actual document. There's a lot of work before the statement is made. And I really think that is a challenge, how we do something on a congregation-wide method. I mean, the tools we have there, I think, are the evangelist is one thing that the entire congregation sees. Possibly, a sermon of some type is a way to get to a broader audience, but it really is a challenge to get all of St. John's, connecting and thinking, instead of doing it at the committee level, which is what we're trying to avoid here, so that it's like Barbara said, it's not something top down. It's really something that the congregation believes in and thinks about when they, when we state it, if it gets incorporated into our services or the start of our meetings, or that. So I just want to sort of build on what Roger was saying there, that the education piece, I think, is going to be a challenge, but hopefully we can find some congregation-wide tools or ways of doing it on a congregation-wide basis.
Yeah, thank you.
I think one of the things we've talked about is the blue insert in to have some sample statements from other organizations and other churches, to have people reflect on them and how they differ and what components they have.
In all senses, in our backyard.
Mhm.
I just wanted to say quickly that one thing for me that is really painful here is I need to revisit my ancestors. In that, the proud stories we tell of pioneering on the North Dakota prairie, and I know I proudly wrote it in my family history I put together, first white settlers in Wright County, North Dakota, or whatever, yay. And all of that, and even the sacred Laura Ingalls Wilder books. Hello, that's we need to, I need to, a major rethinking of that. And I think you have to do it without condemning them. Because they didn't say, oh, let's go take some Indian land. The land was available. I think it was unthinking more than anything, but still those stories are big.
I was wondering, I haven't been here very long, does the church have any relationship with any local Native community? Because it feels like that would be good people to have involved in the conversation, because it's hard to have opinions about something you don't know anything about. And it also feels awkward to talk about what we should do for people when they're not in the conversation at all.
Yeah, that's why I think it needs to be personal to us.
Yeah, but
What-
I guess what I mean is like personal to us, but if it's just us talking about those people over there, that's the wrong kind of personal.
Yeah, it's operating from a colonial mindset about how do you.
I mean, I'm sure that's at least, there might be people in the church who are part of the Native community, but still, like,
There are leaders too, and we'll be engaged in the
okay.
conversation.
And there's All Saints, we're then are very close, which is a primarily Native congregation, Episcopal congregation, where we sometimes go and help out with the Sunday. So there's a relationship with them, which,
Okay.
yay, we have that.
I definitely agree with you, because that's such an important part, and it it is currently coming kind of from that place of us and them separate, and which is, like you said, not great. And like you said, also operating from a colonial mindset. So how do we deepen that relationship together? It's another aspect of that. We don't want it to be top down. We don't want, even in this process, to like be imposing something on a community. Where and then Linda had another great reminder that when I was like, oh, it needs to be committed to action, and Linda was like, we as white people need to stop like doing things that we think is right and just like maybe learn. So in that perspective, like it's a really more ongoing educational piece. We're hoping this can spark that as well.
If you're doing something that's being asked of you, sorry. go
To
ahead.
Barbara's comment about confessing the First Friday Racial Reconciliation Service does open with a land statement, so we're only doing it in one service a month in this church, but at least something's being done to bring that thought continually, which is perhaps what we need to do. The concept needs to be around a long time. And just to talk about decision-making historically in the church, it's just a reminder that we do the Nicene Creed and sort of think about it, well, somebody wrote this, but the first draft was 325, and it wasn't officially authored or approved by an ecumenical council till about 450. So they spent 125 years discussing this creed that we use today. So you can't come to consensus in a couple of months.
Yeah.
Something.
I'm grateful for this conversation, and I feel conflicted because land acknowledgements leave me flat. I'm part native, but I would feel this way anyway, I think. So I'd like to see something in the future that honors or uses the word honor the First Nation people. And again, I'd like to see First Nation people brought into this conversation, at least us asking, what do you guys think? Because we're saying we acknowledge this land, but we're not giving it back to them. I know that's absurd, and that's the extreme level. And what are we ultimately saying? Are we ultimately saying that no one should own property in America? I don't know. I don't have any answers. But there's an honoring that I feel is important. And I don't know how that could work.
I don't actually do anything. I just get these emails because I went to a powwow like 10 years ago and I donated some money, but like they talk about the stuff they need for the community center, the Mendota Sioux. And I feel like obviously we'd want to be in conversation with people, but if there was a way we could be using our facilities to support local Native people who needed help or something, that might be a way to honor people, but you'd want to ask what they needed. But sometimes I feel frustrated by conversations like this where it's about talking and not action, and it feels like it's somehow on you to invent action in your own life without any support. And you feel permanently guilty that you don't invent some great way of fixing the problem, but like no one else did either. You just sort of go home and feel kind of guilty and futile.
Yeah,
It's very intentional for this team to, like, land acknowledgement is a commitment to action of some kind. And we're taking very seriously the idea of listening, and we want to include lots of different voices, not just amongst the congregation, but amongst Indigenous leaders. And so we're in addition to kind of this morning, we're also starting the process of kind of reaching out and trying to gather as many voices as we can that we can listen to and learn from, and who will then help us to understand what could we do, what needs to happen, and what would be most effective, those kinds of things. So this is a first step. It's not just. And I think when we first started the idea of like writing a land acknowledgement, like we were just very naively thought that's all we needed to do. And through the journey, we've come to understand that no, this is like that shouldn't even be the first step. Like, we should be educating ourselves first and doing a lot of listening,
How about-
and then writing a land acknowledgement, and then committing to act on that land
yeah,
acknowledgement.
not only with our lips, but in our lives.
Right.
And so this is to get more into the life part, that how, you know, how will this change of perspective on our part, and this transformation we're trying to make for us and for the church, you know, what will it lead to?
Yeah, this is
Go ahead.
Dan Vocal. And all I wanted to say was that, you know, we're soliciting input from everybody. That doesn't mean we need input from everybody. We want everybody to feel that if they want to do the research, they want to have their voices heard, then they should be able to have their voices heard. And to one other point was that the land acknowledgement is not just the acknowledgement of the prior owners, right? We do need to, in the land acknowledgement, we don't need to come up with how we're going to do this, but we need to recognize that the land was stolen and that compensation needs to be paid. We don't have to come up with how we're going to do that. We just need to, you know, if we can't even come up with that, how are we ever going to get around to actually doing any action? So but that should be in the land acknowledgement. Then we can go to the indigenous people and say, hey, what do you really need, right? So we need to come together and say, yes, we need to do this. Then we go to the indigenous people and say, what can we do to help? What, you know, how can we help you rebuild your community? What can we partner with? Thank you.
This is important. This many, the work you've already done is great, and it's such an important initiative. Thank you.
I'm not sure that this is a new thought, but I guess I just want to put an exclamation point on it, which is that, you know, it isn't the development of the land acknowledgement statement isn't the end, but I don't want us to also rush through it, whether that means in terms of time or just in terms of the amount of energy and attention that we pay to the words that are going to be crafted together, because they are a joint expression of who we are, what we believe. And so investing the time in advance to do some thoughtful study together, I don't think is wasted. I don't think it's frivolous. I don't think it suggests that we're not committed. I think it's important. And also the process itself, whether it's sticky notes or what, or you know, Google Docs or whatever, I think that there's, in these kind of processes, I've found that we have to acknowledge that they're iterative too. I mean, we need to not only start someplace and maybe offer some kernels to start people thinking that isn't the final place you want to be, but you need to offer people something. You can't just say, what do you think should be in an acknowledgement statement, you know? So the process needs to be both thoughtful, but also iterative, as well as, you know, involving lots of people. So
I'm struck by just how very many issues are in play in this conversation, right? And but I guess one that I would want to draw attention to is the need to get buy-in from the congregation as a whole on this process, right? So a lot of work has taken place already, which is extremely important. But what one wouldn't want, I think, is to have someone who's been at St. John's for quite some time, but hasn't, for whatever reason, just been aware of these developments, suddenly feeling something foisted upon that person. So it seems to me that I'm kind of raising the awareness to these issues. With Barbara, I think the one challenge there is, you know, putting this alongside a number of other issues that we've been grappling with, right? And making this rise to prominence, I think could be a real challenge, and a line has to be walked, or balance has to be struck, it seems to me, between, I mean, arguably the congregation as a whole needs to feel the weight of this problem, right? in order to understand why certain steps would be taken. One has to appreciate the difficulties. But to Holly's point, one doesn't want to, throw people in the deep end with no resources for addressing that set of issues. So some kinds of moves forward. For me, along with a couple of expressions that have been made in the conversation, one major question for me is concerning next steps, right? So this acknowledgement is made. What does that mean? What is it suggesting? It somewhat awkwardly, right, places those who are making that acknowledgement in the position of people who have benefited from injustice. And what happens next as a result of that? What sorts of reparations might be made? If some moves forward aren't made, then it can feel like moral exhibitionism, or it can feel empty, right? So it's a major question for me. I'll just say one more thing, which is I think a crucial ingredient for what would happen here would be the need for a theological framing, right? So that the land acknowledgements can take place in any number of registers, but to make sure that ours is a theological one, I think would be important for us.
I certainly echo what Mark just said about the theological basis. I know other organizations with which I'm involved, like the Minneapolis Institute of Art and some others, they have acknowledgement agreements, and they're very, thoughtfully created and very interesting when you read them. But, if ours has to say something about who we are, and the who in this case is a community of faith, so.
I would say that it's kind of seemed like you wanted to do the land acknowledgement first and then the next steps after, because the land acknowledgement is going to be kind of like a mission statement about what the goal is. But then I would suggest that the land acknowledgement statement not be set in stone, because in most projects in life, I find that you don't really know what you're going to do until you're halfway through it and you realize what was wrong with your original plan. And you wouldn't want to like set in stone, this is how we're going to deal with this issue. And then be married to that and realize halfway through that you had a bunch of bad ideas or you didn't understand the situation.
Yeah. That's something that Craig and I think more conversations as well. I've just been like, a self reminder too, is that it's a working document and a work in progress. And I think the issue would be is if we became stagnant in it, or we thought with the best intentions that we came to a solution, when I think it is an ongoing process and a commitment to ongoing work. And so hopefully that reminder is helpful to us as we continue, because I think we so naturally want there to be an end solution and like process. For looking at the time, yes. Ma'am.
No, it just seems to me the most important thing is raising awareness of where we are. That at this very moment, we are standing on Dakota land that was stolen. And I think a lot of people don't know that. And I forget to think about it, but it's so true. And what made me think so much about it was, as you probably know, Karen Armstrong was here speaking at Talking Volumes, I guess it was, and she has a book out about a spiritual relationship with the land that has been lost. But she pointed out all kinds of other cultures who have a very strong relationship with the land, and she thinks that should be renewed. Now, I haven't read her book, so I can't recommend it, but I certainly do plan to read it, because I think that's an important step that we could take as a congregation. Maybe read that book and find out what we can do, and maybe then proceed more thoughtfully when we have raised awareness of what this is, because I don't think most people know that. They'd be very surprised to find out this is Indian land right here.
And what that even means. I had a poem I wanted to close this out with, if that's okay. I passed that out so we can look at it and even read it together if we want, as well as the smaller papers, the invitation to action with my email listed if you want to send any more thoughts as we continue this conversation. But
Thank you, committee, for doing all this important work on our behalf.
Yes, thank you for participating in this conversation. This has been really fruitful. This closing came from this journey, and I thought it would be fitting in our time ending this and going into service. The worst thing we ever did was put God in the sky out of reach, pulling the divinity from the leaf, sifting out the holy from our bones, insisting God isn't bursting dazzlement through everything we've made, a hard commitment to see as ordinary, stripping the sacred from everywhere, to put in a cloud man's elsewhere. Prying closeness from your heart, the worst thing we ever did was take the dance and the song out of prayer, made it sit up straight and cross its legs, removed it of rejoicing, wiped clean its hip sway, its questions, its ecstatic yowl, its tears. The worst thing we ever did is pretend God isn't the easiest thing in this universe, available to every soul and every breath.
Amen.
Thank you.
Heartfelt thanks to Johanna and the Creation Care team. This was a superb launch to our series on justice and vitality in caring for God's creation. So thank you. Please join us next Sunday. We have the Reverend Cynthia Bronson Swigert, who will be leading us in a conversation about how we can be in deep kinship and reverence with all of God's creatures. We live in a time where we've centered ourselves in an anthropocentric problem. And I think if we, through Cynthia's teaching and guidance, get back into right relationship with all of God's creatures, this is an important aspect of justice and vitality in caring for God's creation. So join us.
Refined your title to Beyond Human Exceptional.
Perfect, thank you. So join us next Sunday for Beyond Human Exceptionalism at 9 a.m. with the Reverend Cynthia Bronson Swigert. And now let us go forth into the sanctuary to give thanks to God for all of the blessings in this life.
I just put my email in the chat for those online to continue the conversation. So, yay. Okay.
Thanks, Johanna. Okay, thank you all. Blessings. See you in church.
Thanks, Johanna. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dan. I am. Zoom.